Okay, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. My name is Beth Dickens, and I'm from Blue Hill Heritage Trust. And I am happy to be here for Friends from the Field. We'll be talking to people from both the community and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves because we have quite a few panelists today. But before we do that, I'm going to pass it over to Island Heritage Trust so that they can go over some basic housekeeping and let you know a little bit of the technical information, and then we'll start from there. Hi, Noelle.
Hi everyone. I'm Noelle Ruth. I'm the outreach manager at Island Heritage Trust. So grateful for everyone to be joining us today. And I know that we're going to have a great presentation. And at the end, the panelists are going to hold some space for Q&A. So feel free to drop any questions that come up during the presentation in the Q&A box, and you'll see that Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So at any point in the presentation, if a question comes up, feel free to click that, drop your question in the box, and then Beth and I will field those questions to the panelists at the end of the presentation.
Excellent. Okay. Well, without further ado, I think we should get this started. I'm going to, like I said, not introduce everybody because there's so many, and I know you all do many things. But Stephanie, I have a feeling that you're up first, so welcome.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. My name is Steph Sun. I work with the Community Climate Action Team here at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and I'm joined by Gail Bonus.
Hi, I'm Gail Bonus. I manage the Community Climate Action Team here at GMRI, and really excited to share with you all some of the work that we've done in partnership with your communities and GEI Engineering Consultants in Blue Hill, Brooksville, and Surry over the past 2 years. And then just to dive in and chat about what it means to be involved in doing community work with our panelists. Chris and Irene, who are local residents here in Surry, they'll be hopping on to share about their experience later on.
So Gail and I both work at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and so we're an independent, nonpartisan marine nonprofit. And our mission is to develop and deliver collaborative solutions to global ocean challenges. And so that really entails also working with coastal communities here in Maine. And we were very lucky to have been a part of this 3-town vulnerability assessment project in partnership with the towns as well as GEI.
Right, so to share a bit about what this vulnerability assessment was, it began in September in 2023, ran through December of 2024 when the final report was delivered to the towns. This was funded through the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, GOPIF for short. It was part of their Community Resilience Partnership funding. It was a climate action grant that was received by the towns, and kind of a benefit of the towns collaborating together on that is that made them eligible for a larger amount of funds to do this work together, which was great. So as I mentioned, regional effort between Blue Hill, Brooksville, and Surry in partnership with GMRI and GEI. And then we also worked really closely. If you know Alan Kratz, who is part of many committees probably in your region, including Peninsula Tomorrow, also is with Resilience Work LLC and was a kind of managing a lot of the moving parts and pieces of this project too.
Great. And so in terms of what was included in the assessment, we really ran through multiple climate hazards that are facing these 3 towns, as well as the state of Maine in general. We did a really big deep dive in particular into coastal flooding and adaptation, and then took a higher level view of the different climate hazards of ocean acidification, impacts to plant hardiness, tick-borne diseases, working waterfronts, power outages, extreme heat, as well as clean drinking water and drought. And so for the first part of this webinar, we'll be going in and just sharing a little bit about what we found in terms of the kind of major drivers behind the changes that we're seeing in the region, as well as what some of the local impacts are. And just before hopping in, I want to note that in sharing the findings and the potential impacts of climate on the region, I recognize that I'm kind of taking on the position of being the bearer of bad news. And on the one hand, that could be true in hearing about all the ways in which climate may be affecting and changing your communities. And at the same time, when we think about planning for climate change, it really is hard to begin to identify what recommendations to make or actions to take to address climate without knowing what those local impacts are going to be, and in particular, who they're going to be affecting. And so these vulnerability assessment findings, while they're potentially scary, are really part of a larger process of identifying and breaking down the challenges so that they can be acted upon and addressed. And so that in and of itself is a really important step towards building climate action and preparedness. And then while we're not going to dive into specific recommendations from the assessment in this webinar, there were preliminary actions that were identified through the climate vulnerability assessment process. And those actions range from, small bite-sized initiatives that town committees could lead to broader regional infrastructure projects. And so all of those can be found in the executive summary of the assessment. And we can also work to make sure that you have access to that after this webinar. So hopping into sea level rise and coastal flooding, as a result of warming, we're seeing thermal expansion of seawater as well as the melting of land-based ice that contributes to rising sea levels globally. Locally in the Gulf of Maine, we're seeing sea levels rise at a rate of about 0.14 inches per year. And when you look at this graph on the right, that is showing projections of sea level rise into the future. And they indicate that by 2120, we could see, from 4 feet of sea level rise to up to 8.8 feet of sea level rise. And whether it'll be around 4 feet or 8 feet is really due in part to the actions that we take in the present day and near-term future to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So the impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding in the 3 towns include impacts to critical infrastructure. So there were a few roads that were identified as being a high priority for adaptation due to flood exposure. And those were routes that were also identified as being really important for evacuation. So some of those notable roads, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, include Newbury Neck Road, Cross Road, East Blue Hill Road, Falls Bridge Road, and Dog Island Road. And so those were identified as being really priority roads for maintaining access and emergency response during flood events. In addition to roads, town infrastructure, including state infrastructure, including 9 state-owned culverts and 5 state-owned bridges were identified as being at risk of flood inundation. And again, those were really important for connectivity and emergency services during coastal storms. There were around 100 buildings that were identified as being vulnerable to flooding, and some of those included key facilities, including Blue Hills Wastewater Treatment Facility and multiple public wharves. And so while most of those 100 buildings are not immediately at risk, some of them might face daily flooding by as early as 2050 in the absence of adaptation measures. And then beyond that, about 250 acres of conservation land, as well as several cemeteries across the towns, were also identified as potentially experiencing flood inundation under current and future sea level rise scenarios. And all of those areas really hold important ecological, recreational, and cultural value, and may require these more targeted resilience building strategies.
So one way that we can start to work towards better understanding what those flood projections mean at a local level is just by going out and making observations. And so one thing that the Gulf of Maine Research Institute has been doing for about 2 decades now is community science or citizen science, participatory science, and comes from many names. but it's the act of engaging the public in going out and collecting data to answer a research question that's bigger than one researcher, bigger one lab, and really needs that like broad capacity. So if you think about the state of Maine having 5,000 plus miles of tidal coastline, that's a lot of ground to cover to really understand what those local flood impacts look like. So through this project, we worked with Blue Hill, Brooksville, and Surry to identify coastal flood monitoring sites. These are locations similar to what Steph just mentioned, kind of like those low-lying road areas, places vulnerable to flooding that are publicly accessible. Here, we go back to the other one. Thanks, Steph. They were highlighted in the blue on the map there. To direct folks to make these observations during high tide times, during storms, if safe, major caveat there, but also after storms to look up and see what kind of wash up or damage that might have occurred during those events. This data helps to answer the question, what water level and weather conditions lead to local coastal flooding at this specific area. And that information will help with local flood alerts if you need to close down a road and reroute traffic, thinking about emergency services and who might be cut off to emergency services during flood events or high tides that may result in flooding at specific areas, making sure that those folks are being checked in with and that everything is okay. And also for future planning. So knowing which areas are kind of frequent flooders. Is there an opportunity to adapt there, or maybe do we need to thinking about relocation from that region? Is that a location that needs to kind of be restored to nature and that we can move our infrastructure elsewhere? So some of the outcomes of this project, by getting engaged, you're able to witness kind of climate impacts in real time. So you're building that awareness of coastal flooding and the vulnerabilities within your community. Communities are getting access to this data to help inform decision making. And another piece of this project is that we've worked really closely with the National Weather Service to develop the protocol and process for collecting this data, and it's also informing their flood alerts and models, which is particularly important because not only does Maine have 5,000 miles of tidal coastline, what we don't have is a really robust water level monitoring network. We're working on that one too, but that one's going to take a little bit of time. That historic data is only being collected in 5 locations that are NOAA tide gauges, and part of some other projects we're placing low-cost models throughout the state, but that's going to take some time. So this data in the meantime is really useful to the National Weather Service, and it can also ground truth the models that they have. So we have some upcoming events if you're curious to learn more about how to get out and collect data. We just had a kind of how to host a coastal meetup webinar. So if you've got like a community group or neighbors that you are interested in getting together, we can share the recording to that webinar. It happened last week. Coming up this Friday, we're hosting a coastal meetup here in Portland area. This is something that kind of happens throughout the coast that GMRI hosts as well as partners. So we can share some more of those. I'm not sure if any are happening. Oh yeah, Southwest Harbor, kind of in your region. Next peninsula over on May 21st, there's a coastal meetup that'll be there. And we're also having kind of a Q&A with some of our colleagues who are experts in sea level rise and coastal flood impacts on April 27th or 17th. And then once this high water season comes to a conclusion, we'll have a webinar that reflects back on what were the kind of takeaways or trends or themes that were observed and the data that was collected. And it also creates a great space too for people to talk about what those impacts mean for them and for their communities. So this is the spring high water season. This is something that happens twice a year, every year. So there will be another high water season in the fall, and kind of what we're calling high water season are the highest high tides of the year. King tides is another term for that. You might have heard that one before. So we've set these events up around when those tides are happening. This spring, they're happening kind of during the midnight hours. So you might not see the flooding, but you might see some seaweed washed up on the side of the road as you're commuting to work the next day. In the fall, they happen during daylight hours. So we'll be doing some more events around that then.
And so shifting away from coastal flooding for a minute, we dug into rising temperatures and heat extremes in the area. So global warming due to greenhouse gas emissions is driving up temperatures, particularly in the Northeast. And so summer extremes are likely to become more frequent, and winters are likely going to become milder. And so this doesn't only shift sort of seasonal patterns, but it also extends the heat season, which could provide really great opportunities for agriculture or the growing season, but at the same time has the potential to stress both human health and local ecosystems. And so those increased heat waves are typically linked to higher rates of heat-related illnesses, such as heat stroke. And that is true especially among sort of more vulnerable populations, such as the elderly or those with pre-existing conditions. It's also important to note that in this region, air conditioning is a lot less prevalent than other areas that typically experience higher temperatures. And so again, those longer warm seasons could also alter the migration patterns, both of marine species as well as terrestrial species. So things like ticks, for example. And then finally, when it comes to agriculture, prolonged growing seasons could benefit some crops. But with that, you might also see increased pest risks, heat stress to crops that have the potential to disrupt growing. And then that sort of intense fluctuation in temperatures could also result in things like frost damage, where you're starting to see early bloom or growth of crops followed by a cold snap. Next, when we're thinking about changes in sort of precipitation, drinking water, and drought, shifting precipitation patterns are causing more intense rainfall and longer periods of drought in many regions across the US, but also here in the Northeast. And so we're experiencing more heavy rainfall events, as well as a increased frequency of dry spells. So again, this has the potential to stress water resources and reduce soil moisture. And these patterns are largely influenced by changes in global atmospheric circulation, particularly warming oceans and changes to the jet stream, which contribute to more variable weather. And so with heavier rainfall events, we might expect to see more localized flooding, particularly where that rainfall flooding might coincide with riverine and or coastal flooding in low-lying areas. And this could lead to kind of erosion of land, infrastructure damage, and impacts to roads and bridges. Drought also has the potential to really affect water supply for both crops as well as humans. And so while excessive rain can result in soil erosion and nutrient loading, the drought could also really potentially reduce soil quality. When it comes to drinking water, increased runoff from heavy rains can carry pollutants into rivers and lakes, which can also be these really vital drinking water sources. In addition to that, there are potential ecosystem impacts from increased runoff from heavy rainfall events that, again, could cause harm to ecosystems as well as working waterfront industries, for example, shellfish harvesting. And so on the peninsula, drinking water is primarily sourced from bedrock wells and not surface waters. But with that being said, with sea level rise, you might see challenges from saltwater intrusions. This assessment also found the potential for kind of arsenic contamination and vulnerability to drought in particular due to limited aquifer recharge. We also looked at changes in marine conditions. And so the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on the Earth. And we're seeing, in addition to warming, an increase in ocean acidification. So with rising atmospheric CO2 levels from human activities, that CO2 is absorbed by oceans, which can lead to additional acidification. And so in the Gulf of Maine, the pH of our water has been decreasing, so it's becoming more acidic, noticeably since the 1980s. And so that signals kind of an accelerated rate of acidification here. And so that combination of warmer waters and increased CO2 absorption can really reduce the ability of a lot of the ocean to be able to buffer acidification. And the impacts to that really are to marine life. And so when we're looking at shellfish, for example, acidification can weaken kind of the material that those shells are made out of. And those species are really vital to the region's economy. And then when we're looking at fisheries more broadly, acidification and warming can really impact the species that the lobster population relies upon. And so those lobsters can also be vulnerable to that particular environmental stress and interaction in the food web. And then again, with the warming waters, we're starting to see a shift in the range and distribution of species, meaning that the places where we might go to find lobster or groundfish could be changing. And so that has really big implications, again, for the fishing industry. And so on this note, when we look at those ecosystem changes that, again, are driven by things like temperature, changes in land-based and marine temperatures, we're seeing these warmer winters and potentially longer growing seasons. And again, there's a huge opportunity there, and we're seeing a shift in the plant hardiness zone in the region. And at the same time, there's a risk that comes with the spread of pests like deer ticks, which really thrive in those warmer conditions. And again, we have those impacts potentially to human health. So we're seeing higher instances of Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses in the region. And actually, Maine is kind of a hot spot for that at the moment. And within Maine, Hancock County really stands out. And then again, those impacts to wildlife with invasive species and pests that could really potentially disrupt biodiversity, as well as those food chains and habitats of native species. And so it's likely that there will need to be some adjustments we'll see adjustments in our local ecosystems. This was a slide that I thought was fun because what's going on. And really here we're talking about changes in storm intensity and that impact to infrastructure and power outages. I really hope you found that as funny as I did. If not, I apologize for my bad humor. But with warmer ocean temperatures and shifting atmospheric patterns, we're seeing kind of an increase in the intensity of storms, especially hurricanes, which don't really happen up here, but nor'easters. And so in the Northeast, we've actually seen a 50% increase in intense storm frequency over the past several decades. And that intensity is expected to continue increasing with stronger winds and heavier precipitation, as mentioned. And so increased storm surges and flooding, again, can really damage infrastructure, including, roads and seawalls. But, the increase in storms also really puts a stress on electrical grids. And so the risk of power outages due to those more intense storms is rising as those high winds and flooding down power lines and transformers. And in some areas, those outages are really lasting days or weeks and have the potential to really disrupt communications and or emergency services. And again, with power outages, with increased storms, those have the potential to really disrupt business as usual. And so in particular, we see the fishing industry and tourism being hit really hard by infrastructure damage and service disruptions. And again, with those really significant implications for human health, safety, and well-being.
Thanks so much, Steph. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end if you guys want to kind of pop back into some of the details of those climate impacts. And we'll also make sure that you guys have access to that final report because in it, as Steph mentioned, are recommendations for action. And although a lot of that news, as Steph prefaced, is hard and heavy, and it's we need to confront that change. And not until we have that information in hand to think about that information as now power, and we can make some really informed decisions to support the health and well-being of our communities amidst all of that change. And so there'll be some recommendations for actions in that report. We'll make sure you guys have that too. But we also thought this would be a really fantastic opportunity to take a report off the shelves and give you an opportunity to engage with the folks that were a part of that process as they were part of a community based oversight committee that we met with monthly, if not more frequently, throughout this kind of vulnerability assessment project process. And they really informed kind of what that vulnerability assessment included and really grounded it in kind of the kind of community kind of resources and values. But they're also the ones that are taking and leading that action moving forward. So just to invite those folks to take yourself off of hiding behind your videos. Great, thanks. So, and we'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves too. So Chris, I see you first. Do you want to say hello and a quick intro?
Hi, I'm Chris Stark with the town of Surry and was part of the Oversight Committee with the three towns, Surry, Brooksville, and Blue Hill, working with GEI Engineering and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute on an 18-month climate vulnerability study for our three towns.
Irene.
Hi, I'm Irene Schmidt. I'm a Surry resident and was also part of the Oversight Committee that Chris just mentioned, as well as being co-chair of our town's comprehensive plan. I'm also co-chair of the Conservation Commission.
Thanks, Irene. And hi, Randy. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you. Randy Curtis on the Climate Resilience Committee of the town of Blue Hill, which is why I got appointed to be on the Oversight Committee for this climate vulnerability assessment with Gulf of Maine Research Institute and GEI Engineering.
Yeah, and thanks all for joining. So we have a few questions that we're gonna run through, and we'd love to get your perspectives on this. And I'll ask one person, but feel free, I guess, each of you to kind of chime in. So Irene, do you want to share why this was important work?
Well, I think, I guess I would say more than anything, it helped us as a town to inform people with data, which was really important, and to get across the concept that when it comes to climate impacts, we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. And if you think of Surry, I live off Newberry Neck. I live right on the coast, and we lost a great deal of our shorefront as it relates to these storms. And frankly, I think everybody up and down this peninsula on the water side did the same. So it really, we took this from being, I think, for many people, somewhat theoretical to being something that was close to home here where we live. So it was very important in getting people to pay attention, to feel personally involved, and to feel motivated to try to take action.
Thanks. Chris or Randy, did you want to add anything to that?
I completely agree with what Irene just said. It hit Blue Hill as well. The two wharves were completely submerged. A number of roads were seriously flooded. The storm surge got all the way up to the front door of the wastewater treatment plant, which fortunately had sandbags. Because if that goes down, we're really in trouble in Blue Hill, and the services that Blue Hill provides to some of our neighboring towns. So this assessment was happening at the same time as Blue Hill was putting together a comprehensive land use plan. and they really fed each other. It was really very fortuitous that this was going on, not just in Blue Hill, but a number of the towns on the peninsula were also doing their comprehensive land use plans and being asked questions related to how are they planning and dealing with climate impacts. So this became much more of a dialogue across the entire peninsula and strengthened the emerging Peninsula Tomorrow collaboration, which involves one meeting a month with representatives from all 9 towns talking about climate threats and climate funding. And we were able to get benefit from a lot of the information from the recent funding bills that the previous administration had passed. We'll see what that looks like moving forward.
Thanks so much, Randy. So you started to get to my next question for what it kind of looked like in Blue Hill. So like Irene or Chris, just curious, like how has that climate vulnerability assessment informed Surrey's approach to climate action? As Randy shared, it's been integrating into their comprehensive plan.
Well, the same was true on our end. I think our timing and Blue Hill's timing on comprehensive plans was about the same. And so we really had kind of 3 things coming together. We had the comprehensive plan being developed. And although the state, I don't believe, actually required it in this comprehensive plan, we included a climate change chapter in there. And I think an awful lot of the other towns have done so as well. And so the comp plan, the vulnerability assessment, and then the actual storms in January and March of 2024, that sort of all came together to, to move us to action, which, I think Chris will talk about a little bit later. But it's, when I think of our comprehensive plan, we had a climate chapter and we talked about the things that were being explored by the climate vulnerability assessment. But it was interesting how those issues actually, showed up in an awful lot of the other chapters of the plan. So that people who were interested in the chapter on economy, like it or not, Newberry Neck is one of our, major arteries in the town. Very, very important. I guess it's the longest road in town. And so it was, if you were looking at the transportation chapter, these issues came up in all of those chapters. And so I think as we presented that to the town in various ways, I think people started to recognize that this was or is a set of issues that are going to influence how we live going forward, and to start getting involved in thinking about, well, what can we actually do about that? And so it's, it became part of our future planning, if you will.
Yeah, thanks so much, both. And yeah, you kind of brought up like the timing as well. And I think having this vulnerability assessment really was an informative tool for a comprehensive planning process. So just for other communities that are thinking about or can see their comprehensive plan processes kind of coming up, like what types of other resources would be really useful to inform that, and whether or not the capacity is there to do your own local vulnerability assessment, at least for the Blue Hill peninsular communities outside of Blue Hill, Brooksville, and Surry. I think leading to this report and thinking about how does that data then relate to our community. I think there's a lot of ties that can be made there, because some of the data that Steph was sharing is not granular to the road level, like some of the sea level rise, but some of it is more regional or county level that can be applicable to other towns too. Chris, we'd love to hear from you about what progress has been made since the report was completed.
Well, the progress started happening in the middle of the project because we were almost a year into the project. Gulf of Maine Research Institute asked us to identify people in the community to go take pictures at certain dates with king tides, which happened to be in December and January and March. And in those dates that people were recording that information, we saw a picture earlier, I think, when you were showing the slides of the crossroad that was totally flooded. We were documenting what this might look like during a high tide, and they turned out to be major storm events that from the outset was quite a financial loss with the damage that was done. But it was the documentation was used quickly. We used the information that GEI and GMRI was provided to start applying for grants early on. So the project was report was completed in December, but by the prior spring, we had already used information to apply for engineering studies to continue. We did receive 2 grants for a pre-construction project in Newbury Neck, where the Carrying Place beach area on Newbury Neck Road, the water had cut off 140 households that were out on the end of the neck, and we needed to come up with an evacuation route project plan. And so we have that funded now and it's underway, but that happened before the project was over. We the other very vulnerable place, the Emerton Brook Marsh, there's a crossroad there. We discovered by taking pictures at the time that the pictures told their own story, that our culvert was too small for that volume of water and it caused damage to the marsh. So we've also have been working on that, both trying to restore and preserve the marsh, but also to get the funding to get a bigger culvert there so that less damage happens with these tremendous storm surges. So we're well underway in several areas. The GMRI citizen science was transferred to the Surry Elementary School, and they're carrying that ball now. The 3rd grade class is putting together a brochure on why the marsh is important and why we need to save it. And the 5th grade is also doing a solutionary project on that to inform the community. So we have multi-generational efforts right now working on addressing that climate change is real. Climate change affects our property taxes. We have to have a long-range plan. We have to apply for grants because we can't cover it with the funds we've got. So we also have the congressionally directed spending. We're trying to get $3.9 million for the Newbury Neck project. It was submitted for the 25. We had to move that to 2026, but it's all in place thanks to the information we received from GEI and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. So it's a tool to go after funds, and like I said, we've already had the pre-construction funds to continue the studies.
Thanks so much, Chris. And yeah, get out there and keep collecting that data. I think another thing on timing with this project too is that you guys were really able to well document the January and March storms of 2024, which brought new high water marks for pretty much every town in the state. Randy, is there anything you want to share about any progress or projects happening in Blue Hill?
Well, I think the assessment has been very useful in continuing to raise the awareness within the select board of Blue Hill as to what the challenges are. Half our roads are state roads, the other half are town roads, and they're both subjected in their most vulnerable parts to flooding that lasts longer and longer. And so looking at what the costs of roads are going to be has encouraged the select board to increase capital reserves for unforeseeable activities, not just in general. We did lobby them to create a reserve just for climate change, but they're not quite ready for that yet. So it's a general reserve, but they've increased the size of it to and that's really important. And at the level of town municipal funding strategies. The town applied on its own for a $50,000 grant to look at the two town wharves. With that study will be carried out under competitive bidding, and it's state funding. So those are critical to Blue Hill for its commercial fisheries and recreational use. And then just to move to the more regional collaboration that we're all encouraging each other to do. $250,000 was raised to collaborate on a wildfire assessment plan and a strategic plan across the 9 towns on the peninsula. And that's now beginning. And there's a commercial bidding process to pick a consulting group that will help with that. And why is wildfire collaboration important? Well, I think the fires in California and across the U.S. Have proven that nobody's immune. And we thought Maine, that wasn't a real high priority, but it turns out we suffer increasingly during the summertime drought conditions that could really create some pretty big fires with the fuel load that we have here on the peninsula. So that's good news. That it's going to be addressed across with the fire departments and other interested parties across all 9 towns. And then one more thing, like Surry, Blue Hill is caught up with them to get high school kids and middle school kids involved. And the George Stevens Academy is setting up an eco action club for high school kids. And the first big activity will be sending, I think, at least 6 kids to the Climate Youth Leadership Conference at the University of Maine in the next few weeks. And the timing couldn't be better. It's a way to launch this environmental club and getting kids now more and more involved directly, because I think we're learning that we need to bring them in much sooner than we thought. So that's good news.
Thanks so much both for sharing about those projects. I'm sure there's others that are going on too. And I know from GMRI's perspective, just thrilled to hear about the youth engagement. That's a value that we hold in our work, and had also incorporated youth and reached out to teachers through the vulnerability assessment project to get youth awareness of this work, but also their input in the process as well. So it's really fantastic to see that carried forward, because it is not our future we're planning for, it is theirs. So thank you for sharing that. I think through your answers, you guys have kind of already addressed a little bit about the benefits and challenges of working regionally and kind of the opportunities that can come with like access to additional funds, the knowledge sharing and the co-learning. So we're gonna hop to the last question as well to leave some time for Q&A afterwards. But I'd love to hear from each of you. Because you're all very involved community leaders as well as residents of your communities. So for your neighbors, what are your suggestions for getting involved in community planning or action in your town?
I can just kick it off. we're all of us in the 9 communities are very grateful to have the Peninsula Tomorrow structure where we meet monthly, and people working in municipal government in certain ways. We're all collaborating, we're all sharing information, knowledge. We're constantly learning about things, shoreline erosion and other areas. And Randy mentioned the community wildfire grant was an example of us working in collaboration. But in addition, we when any one of us needs assistance in some way, we write letters of support for each other. The wastewater treatment plant, all the 9 communities kicked in and sent a letter of support for Blue Hill, the Causeway and the Deer Isle. The communities all kicked in, and the response from the state has been, what is going on the Blue Hill Peninsula? You guys are just so supportive of each other. We want to give you guys, support and award you funds because you work together. And that's the message that, in Maine anyway, we understand collaboration is the key to success because climate change, as Irene said earlier, has no boundaries.
I would just add that the Community Resilience Partnership that the state set up and has used to provide critical startup funding for these planning initiatives, which then lead to activities like the vulnerability assessment that you guys participated in, is a very important program. And any town that has not taken advantage of that, that's on the coast of Maine particularly, should. And we, with the 3 towns that were involved, stand at the ready to help any of our neighboring towns and towns throughout Hancock County, for that matter, with our experiences. They need to get that the initial planning funding, and make sure that they ensure that they get the critical service provider allotment, because without that service provider, and we have a great one here in the peninsula, Alan Kratz, proposals just don't get written, and Alan can help jumpstart that, and a good service provider could help a new town that's new to this program also get jump started. And the biggest bottleneck seems to be the funding for that service provider. So we all need to help towns overcome that initial roadblock.
Yeah, just to tag on, Randy pointed out, really important that all communities know about the Maine Won't Wait initiative, and that if their community is not considered part of the climate resiliency partnership, they need to find out why their elected officials are not working on that, because the Maine Won't Wait has the climate action planning down. It's all there. You have the 72 actions that you could potentially do, and behind it is if you are a climate resilient part of that partnership, there's money to without a match to support your efforts in an area that your town has identified as a vulnerability, as a need. So I can't say enough for the way the Maine Won't Wait initiative has been designed. It's the state-of-the-art action planning.
Irene, do you have anything to add around how to get involved in climate planning and action?
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to direct my remarks a little bit more to how individuals in our communities can get involved. I've got a couple of suggestions there. And one is, if your town has a comprehensive plan, the state requires of us to have an implementation and evaluation of the plan, which for each chapter lists, recommended strategies, goals and objectives and strategies. And then the comp plan committee has to identify, okay, who's going to work on that? And what's the timeline for it? So if you look at your own town's comprehensive plan, you can find things in there that are related to climate that should be turned into action. I guess the other thing I would say is that in Surry here, our Conservation Commission is, I think, finding an important role in community education as it relates to the environment. And so we did, last fall, we did a shoreline stabilization workshop, which was the building you see in that photograph there, the Surry Village School. We had an overflow crowd, standing room only, an overflow crowd there for people who turned out for that. At the end of May, we are doing another workshop for the Emerton Marsh that Chris had mentioned, and lots of people are getting involved in that in different ways. So if your town has a conservation commission, consider joining it. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you and help shape what kinds of actions they take. And if your town doesn't have a conservation commission, talk to your select board about maybe getting one started, because it's a good, it's really a good forum and a good mechanism for folks that are concerned about the environment, about climate, about conservation, to find ways to take action.
Thanks so much, all. And I know you mentioned Alan's name, so just to kind of land on kind of a sense of hope as well as maybe a call to action, I'm just going to read. Wasn't able to join. I'm just going to read a bit from an email he sent to me, kind of in response to these actions. So when I say I is Alan for the little bit. Earlier this week, I was in Augusta with the Maine Natural Resource Council for a lobby day. He said it was very stimulating. Talking with our legislatures on the Senate floor and in the State House lobby reminded me how accessible our legislators are for discussion about public policy. Similarly, our federal legislators have ready access to our input. Staff from Collins, King, and Representative Golden regularly join the monthly Zoom meetings of Blue Hill Peninsula tomorrow. Those are also accessible to the public. Reach out to these fine folks to figure out how to join and get the Zoom link. I've joined a few. They're so informative. That was me. Sorry, sidebar. Back to Alan. In those meetings, elected and appointed officials and communities from 9 towns on the Blue Hill Peninsula gather to gain and share information about climate mitigation and climate adaptation. A number of you participate in those meetings as well, and are known to our congressional delegation staff. So working together will be especially important as we navigate new realities in Washington and the collateral impact upon us in Maine. All of us have shown each other that we know how to meet new challenges, and Alan expresses that he is so happy to be with you all on that long-term journey. So that is it from us. I know we kind of went close to the end of the hour, but we do have a few minutes for some questions. But thank you very much to Irene and Randy and Chris for joining Steph and I for this talk, and really bringing kind of the outputs of the report to life and sharing how it has been used and being used in your communities.
Gail and Stephanie, and everyone else, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We don't seem to have any questions in the Q&A at the moment, but I actually have one. It seems like we have a very on the ball community here on the Blue Hill Peninsula. I'm just wondering how that compares to other communities along the coast of Maine and possibly even farther. Are we exceeding in the goal, or are we just part of the crowd and we're all doing the right thing?
Well,
It's a-
it appears that we stand out when we're at state meetings because of our strong spirit of collaboration on the peninsula. I'm sure there are other pockets doing that, but I couldn't speak for them.
Yeah, I was just going to share that I think the doing a project like this, I think really sets the stage for that continued collaboration. And there have been instances of communities working together on similar projects. Though I think the role of Peninsula Tomorrow as a convening space for the towns is a really critical piece in that story.
Okay, great. So I know we've got people still here with us. If anyone does have any questions, now's the time to put that in the Q&A, which is down on the bottom. You use the tab to put those questions in. You can type them in. If not, we'll give it a second here. But if not, I'd like to say on behalf of IHT and BHHT that we have really enjoyed the talk. I found it really informative, and hopefully everyone else did too.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you for your depth of care and presence. It's really inspirational to be a part of such a wide network of people who care so much about the earth and creating avenues for us to understand more deeply and engage from the heart.
Well said.
Oh, we have a question. Yes, Sheila asked, is this being recorded so that it will be available later for others to see? Yes, so Blue Hill Heritage Trust will post this on their YouTube page, and that usually takes a few days to be live. So you can check back. I would say, what do you think, Beth? Monday?
By Monday at the latest. And for those of you who receive our e-news, we send that out once a week. Chances are in the next week or two, I will have a link to this recording so you can watch it from there as well.
And Steph and I will do a follow-up email with links to resources that we referenced, as well as the other folks too. So that might be something you can also share out with people who had registered.
I will make sure to do that.
Thanks, Beth.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. And if anyone in attendance right now does end up with a question after the fact, you can send those to me at beth@bluehillheritagetrust.org, and I will get those questions to our panel, and hopefully we'll get you some answers. Thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Have a good night.
You too.